Okay. Alrighty, let's begin. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for How Not to Overpay for Quality Legal Services. My name is Ryan Beatty, and I work in business development at CEO Law, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. As if a global pandemic wasn't enough, businesses are now facing recessionary pressures that will limit budgets and require spending be evaluated more closely. While some budgetary items may be difficult to reduce, a shifting legal services landscape presents a unique opportunity to reduce overall spending without sacrificing quality or expertise. Today, we're joined by Daniela Liscio, author of How Not to Get Screwed by Your Lawyer, and Steve Monk, founder and CEO at CEO Law, for a deep dive on strategies that will allow you to get more important work done for less in increasingly uncertain times. So we'll begin with some questions for the two of you, and then for any attendees, any questions you might have, put them in the appropriate box, and we'll get around to some at the end. So to begin, I'll ask both of you to just introduce yourselves, just tell the audience a bit about, both your legal and entrepreneurial background. So Daniela, I'll begin with you.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have this discussion. It's such an important one. I was a corporate lawyer for 12 years at Davies, based in Toronto, and also spent 8 years of that in our New York City office before leaving to start my own business in online course creation and business consulting in various capacities. Mostly working with small businesses and entrepreneurs, really to build resilience in their businesses. And Steve, I know that's a topic you've been talking a lot about, which I love. But what was interesting was that because I was kind of now in this world of small business, I was now seeing a stark difference between the big corporate law environment and small business owners who were feeling very disenfranchised from their legal processes, and also like their own lawyer was not on their team. And that's really where the idea for the book came up. I thought, this is so sad. Lawyers act as the biggest advocate for their clients, and clients themselves are not feeling that. So I thought, well, what can we do as business owners to really improve that relationship, to ultimately help them save money, but also to reduce the burden of the stress that comes along with any kind of legal issue. So it's been an enjoyable process to kind of see things from a different perspective, and not only from that sort of big corporate law environment.
Perfect. And Steve, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to, and talk a bit about my background. So I started out as an engineer. My background's been kind of a winding road. I started out as an engineer, and I worked at Lockheed in the aerospace industry, so a huge company. And that whole experience really gave me an appreciation for technology. And I do think technology is always, increasingly part of our lives. And so that was a great background to have. But after a while working as an engineer, I decided that I would leave the engineering to others. And so I went and became a lawyer. And I also worked at Davies Ward & Beck, where Daniela worked. I was only in Toronto. I think I was there before you, Daniela. And I wasn't there as long either. So working at Davies really gave me an appreciation for what it's like to work in a big law firm, and what's good about it and what's not so good about it, and an appreciation for how things work from the inside. And then I left the practice of law and went into business. And I worked in telecommunications and information technology with some very large companies, and then slowly found my way into smaller companies and a more entrepreneurial type world. And through all of that, now I got to be a consumer of legal services. And I would really echo what Daniela was saying, that there are some issues as a consumer of legal services, and things that you just don't think are as good as they could be or as good as they should be. And so that's where in 2017, I started CEO Law with the idea that things could be better. Traditional law is broken, and something better needs to be out there.
Awesome.
Now, what has made you an advocate for a more economical approach to legal services delivery? So I'll hand it off to whoever wants to take that first.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, yeah, Daniela went first the last time, so I'll go first this time. Yeah, when I think about being economical, I really do think that there are people out there that need help. And I think that lawyers are in the business of providing people with help. And I think when people need help, they should have access to the help that they need. And so the economical component is a big part of that, that if things are just prohibitively expensive, then they're not available to people that need help. So I think that some of what is required is to make things more economical, but I also think that there are other elements to the whole issue, that the problem is not just about cost. I think that yes, customers should get access to low cost legal support, but they also deserve great quality. And so, you know, nobody really wants a cheap lawyer, I always say. They want a great lawyer at great value. And so that's a key part, I think, of delivering a better solution. And I also think that technology can make the experience better, to go back to my own technology background. And then finally, I think customers deserve respect. So when I think about providing customers with something better, a really big part of it for me is that the customers get the respect they deserve. And so that's going to involve lots of different things. But, you know, to me, I think about connectedness and responsiveness and transparency, and just making the relationship one that the customers can understand, and where they feel like they have been heard, and fundamentally that they've been respected.
Thanks, Steve. And Daniela?
I love that, Steve, and I know that's when we first spoke, when I was researching the book, that's a lot of what you reflected. I'm going to answer this slightly differently. For me, the reason I'm so passionate about this topic is business exists to be there for its customers, either through products that they are selling or services that they're providing that the customer needs. And equally, you know, a business is only going to survive if they sell enough and they remain profitable. So there's this equation of value provided, right? So that it supports the clients, customers get what they want, and businesses are able to stay in business providing those services. But sometimes industries evolve in a way that you know, develops guarantees and protections for their own survival at the expense of clients. And I think it's useful to remember that lawyers have their hands in every aspect of policy life, whether that's every level of government to academics to business. Lawyers have their hands in all of that. And to me, it's a little bit like when certain aspects of government become overly big and overly bureaucratic, the delivery of those services becomes a little, say, inefficient, say. And then sort of it's like the same people kind of coming in to say, okay, now we're going to fix everything. It's sort of like we're creating the problem, and now we're going to sweep in and say we're going to fix the issues. And to me, over the last like 500 years of the legal industry, I wonder if that has in part happened, because we can acknowledge that most lawyers are doing a fabulous job for their clients, while at the same time recognizing that there are some, say, systemic inherent issues with the delivery of those services to clients. Which is to say, the reason I'm passionate about it is because I think, you know, while lawyers, you know, should be on a pedestal, say, like they've got a expertise that we don't have. We need that. Clients need that. But it's almost like clients are all the way down here. So lawyers are up here, clients are here. And that was what was fascinating to me. When I first thought of this book, I thought this is going to be useful for the first time user of legal services. Well, what I found is that no, whether people were spending a few $1,000s a year or tens of thousands of dollars a year or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on legal spend, they were still feeling the same way, that their lawyers were all the way up here, they were here. So to me, I find this is so important that we're talking about it, because I do think there's opportunities to kind of create a better equilibrium of value to cost, which is, you know, that's what we're discussing. We'll talk about, we'll get into sort of what that means. But that's ultimately why I'm so interested in it, is we have to respect, like Steve said, the perfect word. It is about respect. It's respecting the business and the client to make sure that that value proposition makes sense for them too.
Fantastic. Now, traditional law firms and legal service providers are typically not viewed as value for money propositions. Why do business owners continue to overspend on legal? So Daniela, I'll begin with you.
Sure. We could say, a main premise of why I wrote the book is that business owners need to be more proactive. So that's part of why they end up overspending. But I'm going to maybe take a different turn on this and also suggest that it's a lack of education, but a specific type of education. I know when I was first researching this book, and I had a whole outline, I had a chapter designated for ALSPs, but I quickly realized I don't even know where to start. That's actually why I had to reach out to people like Steve and you, Ryan, to sort of say, I actually do not understand this industry. And it wasn't only that, yes, I had been out of practice for a few years. That was less of an issue. The bigger issue was, here I'm sitting with my business hat on, and I was thinking, I don't even know where I would start necessarily if I did want to find an alternative to, legal services. To me, it's a little bit of like a mass adoption problem. So as big as ALSPs have grown, I think there is not a clear pathway for clients to know, well, what does that mean for me in terms of these alternatives? Because there's hundreds, if like probably thousands really, of alternatives in terms of specific technologies or maybe more full service enterprises like CEO Law. But I wouldn't know necessarily what is the best alternative. And so I think what happens, like now I have a better handle on it, but that's because I, researched a lot and wrote a whole book. Like, clients don't have this time. Like, so what are they going to do in the heat of the moment? They need a lawyer. It's like, okay, I think there's these other alternatives out there, but I don't even know. I'm going to go down the road of traditional law service because I know that path. It's an easier path. So think about it. This is the way I sort of, and actually, now that we're talking about it, I just thought of something. It's almost like maybe clients need, if anyone's looking for a business idea, it's like you need a legal broker, or it's sort of like, okay, well, given your specific legal problem, maybe this basket of options is best, or I don't know, something like that. Because again, Steve, I'm sure you'll give some insight into this, because as a business owner, I wouldn't know where to start. And the way we can sort of think about it is look at crypto, for example. So some people think, and I'm one of them, think that crypto is here to stay. Other people disagree. Doesn't matter what you think. At the moment, there is a ton of friction involved in crypto, using it, buying it, storing it. We literally just had, a major exchange just go belly up. The guy that ran it was on the cover of Fortune magazine, and suddenly the people are out billions of dollars. So there's obviously a ton of friction involved in that industry, but we are at the point where, okay, there's the first 100 million users of crypto. Well, let's think back to the 90s when we had the first 100 million users of the internet. I remember that time. It is not the case that people were saying, okay, we are, in a few years, you are not going to be able to imagine life without it. In fact, there were lots of people still saying the internet's a fad, right? It's not necessarily here to stay. But that 100 million users of the internet became the first billion users of the internet, and then the first, and then 2 billion and whatever like everybody. The last time I was in Nepal, I'm, at 12,000 feet hiking through the mountains, and I'm between two villages. And I literally, because I couldn't, it's amazing. Like, these two women were sitting, resting, like with their iPhones, like just scrolling through. So now you literally cannot imagine life without the internet. We don't know that crypto, for example, is going to follow the same path. What we do know is that, just looking at all kinds of other industries and technologies, mass adoption has a major capacity to create huge upheaval in any industry. And I don't know that we're necessarily there with the ALSP market, because again, I think a lot of people are just not exactly clear on where to start. Once we have that, and as the marketing for ALSPs also kind of catches up to sort of this reality, we will better be able to, or customers will be able to better find a value to cost ratio that benefits them, because I think that's the whole premise of the ALSP market, is that we can provide more specific, better, or at least equal value service for lower cost. Once we have that in place and the ALSP market has kind of reached that level of mass adoption, if you will, I think that's when customers will have a better option to not overspend for legal. Steve, what do you think?
Daniela.
Yeah, so I mean, it's intriguing. Like, I really think that you're making some great points around mass adoption, and how mass adoption is what creates in people a greater awareness that there are options out there and that they should expect to get value for money. I mean, the whole question was, why do people use lawyers when they think it's a bad proposition? And it kind of boils down to, people feel like, well, there is no choice.
Yeah.
Like, it is a necessary evil. And so I think with mass adoption, yeah, I think people will learn that it doesn't have to be a necessary evil. And I think about the things that you mentioned, like the internet, where, over time, people get an understanding of something better, in that case, a way to access information and connect with the world. And so it just becomes an essential element. Crypto, who knows? But I mean, I can think of other examples like Uber, where I think that, when I was a kid, you called a cab. And now I just think, when I see somebody in a cab, I think, what's happening over there? Like, have you not heard of Uber? Because it's, it's far more convenient and it's better quality. And there's a real emphasis on creating a good experience for you as a passenger and creating a good experience for the worker who's driving. And it's just a far better model. And so, it's because people have gained that awareness. And I think for most people, when they think about getting legal support, they kind of end up with 4 possible options. That they're aware of big law firms and they think about that. And the issue from my perspective is that the big law firms are going to be ridiculously expensive. And then when I talk about this respect, for many businesses, the big law firm does not want to do their work. And so, because they've got bigger clients who will pay millions of dollars. And so that's just a misfit on every level for the customer, expensive and a poor experience. People think about, they may have somebody that they know or local in their community who's a lawyer, and they think about going there. And I think that the problem with that is that it's still going to be too expensive. And in all likelihood, the person that they go to doesn't have the experience and expertise that they really need. And so, say I'm selling my business and I, worked my whole life to build this business, and then I go down the street to somebody who does residential real estate and maybe, a bit of family law, maybe goes to court once in a while, and you say, can you help me sell my business? And maybe they say yes. And I just think that is so unfortunate, because somebody has a once in a lifetime transaction and they're going to rely upon somebody who doesn't really have the expertise that they need. And they will pay a lot for that. In fact, they'll pay even more because it will be inefficient, but even just on the hourly rate, it will be high. Sometimes people say, I'm going to do it myself. And I'm a fan of the idea of doing it yourself. But to Daniela's point earlier, people shouldn't try to turn themselves into lawyers. People should respect that, the people who are lawyers have learned that craft over some time. And so when we see people who have done things themselves, often what we see is that things are done incorrectly, and then it's more difficult and more expensive to try and fix that after the fact. And then the other issue that I see is that people who are running small businesses, they should focus on doing what they know how to do, and they should focus on their business, and they should leave other things to someone else. And there's lots of examples of that, but I would say, do you work on your own teeth? Do you do your own auto repairs? And for many people, they'll say, no, I do not. I go to somebody who's got that expertise, and I'm perfectly happy to have them do that. And then I'll do what I do, and hopefully I make more money than I have to pay for that service, and it's a win-win for everyone. But the last option people have is to not do things. And I think all too often people don't do it. And it's because of this belief that lawyers are an evil to be avoided at all costs. And so people will just leave things undone. And I think that's a mistake, because there are things that should be done to properly, protect your company, but also support it for growth. It doesn't have to be a negative working with the lawyer. There are lots of good things you can do with lawyers. You can, You can set up your business for succession planning. You can do tax planning to minimize your tax. You can set up shareholders agreements that are going to help you if things ever go sideways with your shareholders, which often happens. You can set up your contracts so that you're properly protected and people understand what is being given in exchange for the money that they pay for your product or service. So there's lots of good things that lawyers can do. And so, at the end of all of this, I just think the reason people get stuck is because they don't see a good alternative. Of the four things I mentioned, big law, small law, do it yourself or don't do it, people just get stuck and think none of those are good. And so if somebody can come into the market, and that's where I think there's the role for disruption and then mass adoption, if someone can create something that solves those issues and will give somebody, a great lawyer who's got the expertise they need, and it's high value, so that, that expertise is given for an affordable price. And then there's, other things that will make that experience a great one, like respect for the client or use of technology or things like that, that are going to create, over time, the mass adoption that I really believe eventually should be the case.
Perfect. Thanks for both of your answers. And now, being both lawyers and business owners, you each have unique perspectives on how lawyers and startup or small business owners interact. Putting your business owner hat on, what suggestions can you provide to business owners looking to get the most out of the relationship with legal service providers? So, Steve, I'll start off with you.
Okay. Well, so I've got this interesting, or maybe it's not, but I'm gonna talk about it anyways. This perspective on how people should choose a lawyer, and I say choose your lawyer like you choose your favorite restaurant. And the reason I say that is because I think for everybody, you've got a favorite restaurant, and undoubtedly it begins with great food. That if a restaurant doesn't have delicious food, it's unlikely to be your favorite. So it's probably that you think, when I go there, the food is always amazing. The second thing you probably like is the value of that experience. That if it's prohibitively expensive, you may go sometimes, but it's not going to be your favorite because it's just too expensive for you to go on a regular basis. So you want some kind of balance between amazing food and reasonable value. And then the last thing that I think is so important is the customer experience, the service that you get. Because there are some restaurants where you go and you feel like you're a nuisance and they're kind of bothered that you're there. And for me, that's always a killer. And I think, people are not going to have a favorite restaurant where they get treated with disdain when they go there. People are going to love a place where when you go there, you feel like you've, come to a friend's house and they're so happy to see you and they accommodate everything that you want, even if the things you want are, somewhat unreasonable. They just make you feel so welcome. And so I think that's what makes a great restaurant. And I would say the same about lawyers. Choose your lawyer the way you choose your favorite restaurant. You should get a great lawyer. It should be somebody who knows what you need and they've done it before and they're going to give you top quality. It should be good value. And then the last piece, the customer experience should be a good one. And if it's not, then I don't think you should work with that lawyer. When you go and speak with your lawyer, you should feel like, you're welcome and they're so happy to be able to help you and they really appreciate that relationship. So, I think customers deserve to feel appreciated by the lawyers that they work with. And so when you're choosing a lawyer, I kind of say, pick your lawyer like you pick your favorite restaurant.
Perfect.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was super fun. And, as you were speaking about all of these issues, Steve, I mean, that applies to all business, right? And, it just occurred to me that, and I know this is an obvious point, it just seems that why do we forget that in the legal industry? So like all of the elements that you went through are exactly maybe why the ALSP market has grown so much, is because that there is greater attention to all of those elements of, picking your favorite restaurant. Super, super helpful. I think for me, as I, sort of keep my business hat on, I say, okay, well, again, to make the point that I made before, is like, I'm deferring to the expert. I'm hiring that person for a reason because I may not know the particular legal issues involved. I need help strategizing through, whatever the legal process is in this case, the justice system. What happens when we do that is, we say, okay, well, they can handle it. And, I'm going to show up for meetings and respond and do whatever I need to do, whatever the lawyer's asking me to do. But it's kind of like it's an overly deferential approach. It's like we become sort of more like submissive to the process. Just like, no doctor is going to care as much about your health as you. It could be the best doctor in the world with the best bedside manner, but still no one cares about your health the way you do. And moreover, you cannot outsource aspects of your health to a doctor. You need to do that. So the way I think about it is, okay, well, what frame of reference can I put on this? I am still the team owner. Like my lawyer may be the quarterback, maybe they're even the coach, but I'm the team owner. I still need to sort of have this 30,000 foot view. And just like I would manage any other process in my business, whether it's a tax audit, a hiring process, a new negotiation with whoever, a client or a supplier, whatever, I'm going to have a series of steps and processes that I know I need to follow to execute on any of those functions, A to B. Well, why do we not have, I need to, as a business owner, have the exact same sort of reference in thinking about my legal process. Now, it's obviously going to be up to my lawyer. I'm not going to be able to fill it out the same way because, again, they are spearheading the effort. I need to rely on their expertise for strategy and so on. But that does not mean I should be taking this like overly deferential approach. I am still the team owner in this transaction, in this relationship, as much as as much as I want the lawyer to be respectful of me, I'm going to respect their position, but that means me showing up as the team owner. So it's a subtle shift, but it kind of means the world. And when people hear that for the first time, it's like, well, that's obvious. It's like, well, no, it isn't, because no one's actually doing it. There's lots of things that are obvious to us. We all know we should be drinking more water and eating more vegetables. It doesn't mean we're actually going to do these things. And it's the same thing. Human behavior is human behavior. It is the same thing in this context. So I think that's important. And as we're thinking through this process of, okay, I'm the team owner, I have skills that I need to get me through day to day of my business life. I need to take those and make sure that they are showing up in the lawyer-client relationship just as much. And not, again, sort of take this back seat. And I realized that early on, as I was, I first thought about this, a Navy nuclear engineer I was talking to runs multiple 7-figure businesses, does not have a shy bone in his body. And even he said to me, sometimes I even get intimidated talking to a lawyer. And I'm like, what is happening to me? I had the wildly successful people use words like, I felt violated, I felt intimidated. This is not just, people who are, not running productive lives. It doesn't matter how productive, unproductive you should, lawyers should always respect their clients. That's not the point. The point is, this is not a unique feeling. And I think it's important then to sort of say, look, if this feeling is there, even if you don't think you have it, you need to take all of the skills that you already have as a business owner and apply them to this relationship. Whether that's with respect to your communications, whether that's with respect to any kind of project management that you would use in a regular business scenario to transport it into the the lawyer-client relationship, any of that, you need to think, I need to show up fully as the business person and not sort of like the submissive person back here.
Yeah, those are such great points, Daniela. And the things that you're saying, that really resonates with me, that there have been relationships where people feel like, they should respect the cloth, if you will, and not get involved. And, and your doctor analogy is another great one, where people feel like, they don't have any entitlement to ask questions about the healthcare they're going to receive. And I just think it's crazy. And that you should ask, you should be able to ask questions, and you should be able to create a relationship that makes sense to you. And you should, have things demystified. And the last thing you should do is feel intimidated when you're the customer and you're purchasing a service. And so I think, but people do feel that. And that's where I think it's important, like your book is important, because it suggests to people it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it should not be that way.
Right. Absolutely.
Perfect. Now, when a non-lawyer business owner engages with a lawyer, there can be sometimes feel like an imbalance of power because the lawyer has specialized expertise that the business owner may not fully understand. What can you suggest business owners can do to even the playing field to make sure they're not being taken advantage of? I know, you both kind of spoke about this just at the last question, but, if you have any more to add, that'd be great. So Danielle, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, and this question, yeah, we have already started to discuss this, but it really goes to the heart of why I wrote this book in the first place. But to kind of summarize into, I would say, two main things. One is to adopt that proactive approach that we've just discussed and guard against that, like overly deferential positioning that's just kind of inherently going to be there in that type of relationship. And second, well, to make sure that we do that, because yes, we know we need to be proactive, but what does that actually mean? Well, to help execute on that premise, then we need some kind of system in place to ensure that the system is going to reflect what the client is looking for in terms of their strategy going forward. For example, an easy example would be, well, am I hiring this lawyer because I am going to set a precedent in my business that no one is going to take advantage of me and I'm going to fight back? Or do I just want this thing to go away? I mean, that's a strategy decision that the business owner is going to make with guidance from legal counsel. But the system should sort of reflect that and then include all of the various steps and processes that are going to go into ensuring that, yes, I'm going to be proactive in this. So for another easy example, I cannot tell you how many business owners told me flat out, no, I never read my engagement letter. Like, and again, these are not dumb people, right? And so it's like, well, maybe you might want to do that. And it, again, seems obvious, but in the heat of busy everyday life, whatever, I'm not going to have any choice in the matter of signing this. I'm going to just sign it, send it back, be done with it. Maybe you get lucky and like you sort of skim through it and make sure there's nothing glaringly, abhorrent to you. But I mean, it's just simple things like that is having a process in place to ensure, okay, what is the process when I get a document that I need to read from my lawyer? How am I going to make sure that these things actually happen? Just like, maybe an easy example is like, well, how do we know we should go to the gym, but unless you've got a internal process, something that's going on in your life to make sure that, yes, I'm going to actually get to the gym, it's not going to happen. So it's not just having the goal of being proactive. It's okay, well, what do I need to now do to make sure that, yes, I'm going to be proactive in this thing. So it's really those two things. It's the intention to be proactive and then the plan to be proactive that will help in that respect.
Yeah, so I mean, I think all of those are such great points. And I think that they do go back to this idea that sometimes people don't do those things because they feel intimidated or they feel, that they should not be included, like not reading your engagement letter. Maybe people feel like they need a lawyer to read the engagement letter for them. But in any event, I think it would be reasonable to ask somebody, what does this mean? What does that mean? Like you could look through the engagement letter and ask questions. Or you could even ask what's in this engagement letter. Like the core elements for me are about what I get and what I'm going to pay. So what's in here? What am I going to have to pay for? And, that would really put the onus on the lawyer. But I think those are reasonable questions. And I think that reasonable questions make sense in any relationship. So to go back to the doctor example, like I'm a big fan of asking questions and trying to get, an understanding of what's really happened or what's really happening. And then I think it's reasonable to ask, well, what do you envision as the possible solution here? What are the options? What are the pros and cons of each? Have you done this before? When you've done it before, what happened? Like, what was your experience and what was the client's experience? What outcome should I expect? How long is this going to take? What is this going to cost? Like, I think these are all reasonable questions And so to build a better relationship and get a better understanding and try and be proactive, as Daniela was saying, I think, the point is to ask these questions and not feel embarrassed or shy. They're totally reasonable questions. And why would anyone not answer them? And if they can't answer them to your satisfaction, then I would say that's a good reason to think about whether this is a good relationship for you.
It's funny, Steve, we should really bring up the point that I think nobody wants to feel dumb, right? Like nobody. So, and I really do think that's partly why we just don't ask questions. And it's sad, but even as like, it's a problem with children. It's a problem equally with adults. And I've seen this in every aspect of life, whether it's business or any number of things. I mean, frankly, I brought up FTX, for example, again, one of the largest crypto exchanges, like no one was asking. So, I mean, there was sophisticated and serious money going into this business. Clearly, not everyone was asking all the right questions. And, we can get into, I mean, it's a different, yes, no regulation. It doesn't matter. Like sometimes you sort of go, okay, well, why were some of these questions not asked? And I think it's okay for people to recognize, look, I don't want to feel dumb. Nobody wants to feel dumb, but that's also where lawyers can also do a better job of making sure their clients don't feel dumb or not make them feel like it's just some questions, right? Like how are they going to know? How do we know? Even as a lawyer, I would have lots of questions to ask a lawyer that I'm hiring, right? I think we can all sort of agree on that. So, I just, it's something as so simple as that is just recognize, and there's some psychology behind this. I talk about that in the book as to why that dynamic happens, but it does happen and it's okay to acknowledge it, but also just recognize it. And that sometimes helps us get past the hurdle of, okay, I know I'm going to have this feeling, but I'm still going to go in and make sure that you have your team owner hat on. My team, as a team owner, I need to be prudent and ask prudent questions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the questions can be super basic. I'm a huge fan of super basic questions and saying to somebody, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you please explain that again?
Right.
And I think it's reasonable for me to keep asking that. And to your point around, it's a two-way street. It's not just me feeling like I'm a bit slow and I can't follow, but it's also on the other party to do a better job of communicating.
Yeah.
And so I think by asking those questions, and if you don't understand, then it's perfectly reasonable to say, can you explain it again? And it doesn't mean that I'm somehow, unable to understand concepts. It may be that those concepts are being explained very poorly. Yeah. And it may go back to, historical relationships where people are told, like, don't you worry about it. Like, I'm the expert here and you can just have faith. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm a fan of having a more transparent relationship.
Right.
All right, perfect. So the next question is, what can you suggest to someone in the process of selecting a legal service provider? So Steve, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think we've covered so much of this already. And so I think it's good to kind of come back to it. But like I said before, choose your lawyer like you choose your favorite restaurant. Make sure you're getting high quality and good value and a great customer experience. And then, like we were just talking about, you should not feel nervous. You should not feel afraid to ask questions. I think there were lots of things that were like this in the past. And I kind of think about, buying a car used to be shrouded in mystery, or getting a mortgage used to be a relationship where people felt uncomfortable, or we've talked about doctors where people feel shy to ask any questions, or maybe you're a mechanic, you kind of feel like I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope. And I think that should not be the case in your relationship with your lawyer, and probably not in all of those other things as well. That the world has changed. And with the changing of the world, then you're entitled to have your questions answered, and you're entitled to have a good customer experience. And to go back to the same word, you're entitled to feel respected as a customer. And so I would say, when you're trying to pick your lawyer, make sure that you feel respected.
Yeah, the restaurant framing of that is so helpful. I think while people are sort of thinking, okay, but I don't know, like, how do I get to the point where I can even find people to sort of evaluate if they satisfy sort of all of those various elements that you just brought up so nicely. I might say, because there's lots of factors that go into, I might have a little chapter on sort of picking your lawyer, but let's deal with referrals, because obviously that's a big one. And I think referrals are great, but I think where we go wrong with, okay, well, do you know a lawyer do you know a corporate lawyer? Well, to do what? Like, so it's the ask stays way too general and way too generic. And you had mentioned this before, Steve, is kind of like, well, how can I be more specific in that ask that I can then therefore get some better guidance? Is it, if I'm looking for a family lawyer, is it just for like a kind of a straight up divorce, or do I have like a really complex custody issue or estates issue or something? So it's not just, I need a family lawyer. I need a family lawyer who maybe has this particular expertise. And you had said, straight out, like, ask the lawyer, yes, do you have experience with this? But at the referral stage, when you're asking colleagues or trusted advisors, like, do you know of these people? Just being as specific as you can is helpful. And going back to the sort of the ALSP point, to the extent that there is a client who is interested in maybe exploring those options, same thing. It's kind of like, okay, I've got this particular issue. Is there someone in my network that I can reach out to maybe get a better understanding of how this other aspect of legal services can maybe help me? So it really comes down to try and be as specific as you can. Obviously, that requires the client understanding, well, I know what I need, and sometimes you don't know that, but just doing the best you can as a starting point is helpful.
Fantastic. And now, do you suggest business owners work with multiple law firms as a way to keep them honest? Danielle, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think I'd probably say not necessarily. I think the best way to keep people honest is by having honest conversations. That's how we develop really strong relationships, whether in our personal life or our business life. And I know that sounds naive. I admit that, but lawyers are human. Clients are human. We all want to work with people that we feel good around. That's just kind of a simple fact. So I would say, look, to the extent that the relationship is no longer working out, and corporate lawyers would say this all the time, like, you're only as good as your last deal. So maybe you've had 10 great deals, and then your 11th is maybe not so great. Maybe you're not going to go back to that lawyer, but I don't know. I think, lots of reasons why you may want to end that relationship. But in the meantime, keeping your law firm or your lawyer honest really comes down to, again, going in with the intention of creating a more holistic relationship with that advisor, someone that you can really count on as a trusted advisor, and being more engaged, kind of coming back to the point that we've already raised. If you're going to be more engaged in that relationship, well, then maybe you have less to worry about in terms of, okay, I got to keep them honest. So I might say that for that question.
Yeah, so my answer is, I guess it's the wording around keeping someone honest that maybe sounds a bit difficult in terms of answering the question. But in terms of having alternatives available, most large clients, most large companies have multiple lawyers that they work with. And I think there's good reason for that it can be about different expertise for different matters. It can be about having a point of comparison around what was the experience like here and what's the experience like if I use somebody different. And so I'm kind of a fan of that, this idea that you should have alternatives as much as anything so you can compare things. And we always say that, somebody doesn't have to stop using their current firm if they want to work with us, that we can be complementary, and that there are benefits to that complementary approach. Which can be around, what if someone's not available? Like, what if your ordinary support line, either they're not available, or they're too busy, or they don't have the right expertise, and so they just can't give you what you need in the moment. That's where I think it's good if you've got an alternative, and so you can get another solution. And then I do say, even though I say, you don't have to stop using law firm X to work with law firm Y, I do think that once you try things, you might decide, you know what, I actually like law firm Y better than I did X. And so, I'm going to work with them a bit more.
That's really
Perfect.
helpful. Can I add something to that actually? Because Steve, you made me think of this, and that's so good that you've highlighted the expertise point, which you're absolutely right. Like if there's certain people are going to be expert at different things, so that's super helpful. One of the things like I got as when I wrote this, it's sort of like the title was already like how not to get screwed by your lawyer. So some people took that as, well, that assumes I'm going to get screwed by your lawyer. So that's obviously not the intention of going into a relationship, but it is to say, so for example, a bill, I'm not going to necessarily assume that my lawyer is going to overbill me, but as a prudent business owner, I'm still going to read it. Just like I get a credit card statement every month. I don't think the credit card company is out to get me. I don't think the merchants are out to get me. I'm just going to look at it just to make sure. That's what a prudent person does. So you had said that, Steve, kind of earlier on is sort of like the language of the way this question was worded. And I agree. It's kind of a big point. We want to go into a relationship, not thinking that we're going to be the sucker. Like that's not, when I'm learning poker and I sit down at a table, I'm not very good. So like, I know I'm going to be the sucker at the table. That's not really the best way to enter a table. It's not really the best way to enter a negotiation. On the other hand, there's a difference between walking in with that perspective and simply saying, yes, but I have responsibilities as a business owner to remain prudent on all of these things.
Perfect. Now, how do you think current economic environment and a looming recession will impact the way that law firms and clients interact with one another? And Steve, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, well, I think that there are kind of strange things happening in the world right now where some of the things that are happening seem misaligned with other things that are happening. And so I think about for business operators, you've got high inflation, which may mean, you've got higher costs for the things that you need. And maybe your savings are shrinking because there's declining markets and you've got your money in something that has like cryptocurrency, like Daniela was referring to. And all of a sudden, it's not worth what it used to be. And then there's high interest rates, which have, a higher cost for you of borrowing or maybe a higher cost of debt. And so these are all things that make things harder for you as a business operator. And then on the other hand, there are things like wage inflation, where there are pockets in the market where people are getting paid more than they ever got paid. And so that dynamic is happening for them. At the same time, businesses and business owners might be struggling. And law firms are one place that I think that's really been rampant, that there's been a lot of wage inflation. And a lot of it had to do with a frothy business environment where in Canada, lawyers were going to New York. As they left, then law firms were hiring from companies and from smaller law firms. And then the companies and smaller law firms were trying to replace from somewhere else. And all along the chain, people were getting paid more and more. And we recently spoke with a general counsel who said that the lawyers he used to use in the big firms who were $1,300 an hour now are charging $1,600 an hour, and in some cases $1,700 an hour. And this particular general counsel was saying, that just doesn't work for me. Like we've got strains in our business, and this is not the time for me to work with somebody who says, sorry, but I'm putting up my rates by $400 an hour. And I just think that's insane. And so, I think that that's where alternative options that offer better value, which were always a good idea in my opinion, are an even better a better idea than ever right now, so that you can work with somebody who's not, gonna force that misalignment onto you.
Excellent points. Yeah, I think, a lot of what you reflected, Steve, is a little bit of some of what we saw after the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And we can look back to that to say, okay, well, there's certain similarities in economic environment. So what lessons can we take from that? And, certainly at the time, I remember I was in our New York office at the time, and we had a lot. I mean, there's nothing like hardship to kind of build or get the creative muscles kind of going, right? And so we saw lots of alternative billing arrangements. We saw clients pushing back a little bit with quite extravagant billing guidelines, telling law firms what they would and would not pay for. So, and that none of that stuff has gone away, right? It just was very prevalent at that time. It's sort of like they're popping up, just like you mentioned this example with your general counsel. It's like, okay, wage inflation, yeah, but that's an extreme that we just can't, is not going to work for our business. I think there's also another factor to your point, Steve, that there's weird things going on. There's something that is very unique to this particular time as we enter 2023. And that is, it's frankly not a discussion that we're having enough. So I'm super delighted that we have an opportunity to discuss it here. It, might be considered an elephant in the room. If anyone's read my book, Chapter 8 is filled with elephants as they pertain to lawyer billing practices. The big issue today, I think for us, is that there is what I would say a bit of an unprecedented distrust in public institutions and experts. That is a new thing. And it may be more stark here in the US compared to Canada, but I've lived here for 18 years and just in my small empirical view, it seems like whatever is brewing here, eventually, like it's like the hot air, it's going to Canada and it's already there. And frankly, Canada's just a smaller country, so you're not going to necessarily feel it. It is a thing. Whether people want to acknowledge it or not, rightly or wrongly. I mean, look, let's just take the Federal Reserve for a perfect example, and we can throw the Bank of Canada in there as well. Oh, we didn't see this inflation coming. And it's kind of like, well, really? Because everybody else did. Like, talk about being asleep at the wheel. So people are feeling a very distinct, sort of like, well, why do we have all these experts when they're consistently wrong about things? True or not, that is simply the perception. And again, it's not the issue of whether it's justified, not justified, doesn't matter. Lawyers are lumped into the basket of experts for all intents and purposes here. And I think as much as to me, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for, again, alternatives to traditional legal services coming to the forefront. Again, I mentioned it before, as the sort of marketing opportunities kind of catch up for ALSPs to create clearer pathways for clients to know, where can I go if I don't want to use a traditional law firm? I think just, that the environment is so ripe for people to use all of these other alternatives because they want alternatives. They don't want to go to the traditional expert. The traditional expert has let people down. Millions of people are suffering because of that lack of expertise. And whether people want to acknowledge it or not, it's a real thing. This is how clients are feeling. So, the best law firms, the best ALSPs are going to, again, to the point that you started with, Steve, is be respectful of where clients are in terms of their thinking so that they can then either address how they are going to solve that problem for them, and also, how do I market to them? If CEO Law believes that, look, I can provide this fantastic service at a lower cost, well, then it's your obligation to make sure that you get that message in front of people that you can help, right? I mean, that's what we all do as business owners. So to me, I see this as a huge opportunity to really push the legal, the provision of legal services forward in a new way. And just, sort of picking up from kind of the weirdness that's going on. And it's not weird. It's just, things change. It's fascinating, really, to look at all these things. So sorry, I belabored that point, but I hope I made that clear.
Perfect. Thank you. And Daniela, for those listening to you today and interested in your book, How Not to Get Screwed by Your Lawyer, what can you tell them about what they'll get out of it?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, first, readers will just get plenty of very specific examples of how to better that relationship, just kind of touching on all the things that we've talked about today. But the second is, interestingly, I had quite a lot of readers write back to sort of say, especially coming out of pandemic where we prioritized big business. So like, for example, the Walmarts of the world were considered essential. A lot of small business was closed. And I think, people actually said in different ways, but it came down to, you know what, this book made me feel reinvigorated about business, and more importantly, my importance in the economy and my importance in, their communities. That was beautiful, because that's certainly a sentiment that I hoped would get across, but it was obviously not the main premise of the book. So that was nice to hear.
Perfect, thank you. And Steve, as the owner of an ALSP, what are you doing to be a better partner to small and medium-sized business?
Yeah, so it's all of the things that we've spoken about. We're trying to deliver something better. We're trying to deliver respect. We're trying to be like someone's favorite restaurant, where they'll feel like, they got a great lawyer at great value, and they got the respect that they deserve. And then, I guess I'll just come back to CEO Law, our name. It's an acronym for Customer, Employee, Owner, which is my belief about how you have to build a great business. Make sure you have happy customers. To have happy customers, you have to have happy employees, and owners should come last. Because if you want to be a successful owner, I would say make sure you have happy customers and happy employees. So that's kind of a philosophy. And it might sound intuitive, but I think there are lots of businesses that don't really follow that order. And I might say that big law firms don't do a good job of following that order, that it may be more about the lawyers than it is about the customers. So it might be, OEC. Anyways, I just think that, how can you give something better to small and medium-sized businesses? It's those things I mentioned. And it really starts with respect and a great product.
Perfect, thank you. And now, any closing thoughts that either of you have before we wrap everything up?
I might just say quickly, look, it's to me, it's private business that often solves kind of all of the problems that we really care about. And, it's not likely that we're going to look to the CDC or Health Canada to come up for the cure for cancer. It's innovations and development through private enterprise that tend to kind of lead the way in all of the things that really matter to all of us. So it's more important than ever for businesses to stay strong. Steve, I know you've been talking about resilience a lot. Again, like I love that, because that is really what it's about. We need to adapt to all of these changes and adapt quickly. It's very difficult, but I just hope people can sort of walk away from our conversation sort of feeling empowered to do that and to stay resilient in these modern times, and to understand that they do absolutely have an important part to play in developing those more fruitful, mutually beneficial professional relationships, not only with lawyers only, like with all of their professional relationships, not only to save themselves money, although that's a key ingredient, but also for the maybe leadership opportunities that approach brings to the table as well.
Yeah, so I really appreciate those comments about resilience. And I do, I've been thinking a lot about how we can all be resilient by helping each other. And I think that's kind of at the core of what you're talking about. Service providers can do a better job of helping the people who need their help, and the clients too can help make that relationship a better one. And so, there's a role for everyone to kind of help each other. And as far as my closing comments, I really wanted to say thank you to Daniela for coming today. Really appreciate it. Great insights. And so we were super lucky to have you. The book is a great one. I read it myself. And in fact, I got interviewed a bit as the book was coming together. So I really recommend that people get it. And I think it is a great roadmap for how to, work in a more effective way with your lawyers. Ryan, I wanted to thank you for moderating. And then most importantly, I wanted to thank everyone who's given us some time to think about it, and we'll make the recording available. And I really appreciate people coming today.
Yeah, and thank you to all participants in today's webinar, including Daniela and Steve. Really appreciate the both of you doing this. All registrants will receive a link to today's recording following the live event. So if you want to rewatch it, you will be able to do so. And for anyone looking to get into touch with Steve or Daniela, they're both very active on LinkedIn and happy to connect. We'll also be giving away 2 copies of Daniela's new book, How Not to Get Screwed by Your Lawyer, to 2 participants for today's webinar. So we will reach out to them directly if you're one of the lucky winners. Thanks again and have a great day.